Our guest today is Bruce Wolff. Bruce Wolff is the founder and executive director of Brigade Air. He's also the son of missionaries in Africa. After college, he left working in industry and went back to school, then served as a missionary pilot in Arizona and Mexico for 6 years. Bruce's website is brigadeair.org, and his new book is Finding Hope, Navigating an Obscure Path, Learning to Trust God When You Can Barely Understand Him. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I have a copy of the book right here, Finding Hope, Navigating an Obscure Path, Bruce Wolff. He has a great first name. Bruce Wolff, welcome to the Bruce Collins Show.
Hey, Bruce. Good to be here.
Now tell us first, what can people find at your website, brigadeair.org?
Well, they'll find out a little bit about our history, and of course, there's links to our partner programs there on the partners page, who we are. There's news and media links. Quite a bit accumulated over 25 years.
Now, when I was a child, my grandfather was a pastor, and so some of your story resonates with me because my mother was going through a divorce. My dad actually ended up in jail. And served lifetime probation at the end. Thank goodness he rededicated his life to the Lord and basically lived in a motorhome off of the church property in Sierra Vista, Arizona. But my mother revealed that when my grandfather was young in his ministry, that he physically abused his wife, which the congregations never knew that, obviously. And I understand your childhood sort of had some difficulties in that area. Can you explain that?
Oh, explain it or just tell the story?
Tell the
can't
story.
Explain it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to have to ask Dad, and he's not available anymore. So, I grew up around Christian faith, but as you've already picked up on it, it really wasn't the comfortable kind. My folks were Salvation Army missionaries, and we moved 27 times in 20 years. The family did. So, including England and Nigeria, I really didn't know where I was from. So, Dad was in the Navy, and then later he was a captain in the Salvation Army and was appointed as a missionary. We survived the Nigerian Civil War, which started while we were in Lagos, Nigeria in 1966. It's still called Africa's bloodiest coup today, where over 3 million people were starved to death or killed with machetes. In our last 3 months in Nigeria, assassins were sent onto the Salvation Army campus to kill my father. He was seen as a threat. It's kind of how it goes if you're an American in a place where they don't want Americans. They figure it's your fault. So for some reason, they targeted him, and he survived those attempts. So they were unsuccessful, but that was our cue to evacuate, and we wound up moving into New York City in the Bowery, where my grandfather, who ran the Men's Social Service Center for the Salvation Army, had an apartment. The Bowery, Manhattan in 1967 wasn't a friendly place either. So we kind of jumped from the African jungle to the concrete jungle, from the pan to the fire in a lot of ways. And then shortly after we moved back to the States, Dad was diagnosed with ALS, and he died at the age of 36. So it was pretty rough years for the family. Ironically, my dad's buried only a stone's throw from where Lou Gehrig's grave is in Kensico Cemetery in New York City. So the way I put it in the book was Lou Gehrig died of Don Wolff's disease. So, that's just how the name thing goes. But from the beginning, really, to answer your question, my life was shaped by upheaval and confusion. So, what I saw at an early age was not a predictable path, but a chaotic one. And I didn't begin navigating this obscure path, as the title of the book reads. As a willing young pilgrim, all I wanted to do was find my bearings and escape the chaos. So, besides all that stuff, Dad was abusive. He had a lot of unsettled stuff from his own childhood, which I slowly learned about over many years. Didn't know as a kid what was the monkey on his back. So he would hit first, ask questions later kind of a guy. And, as you mentioned before, somebody who's an abuser or an alcoholic or you try to find a reason why do they do it? Well, something's going on inside is the answer, and most of us can't see it. Um, after uh, Dad died, and I began to work through these issues, I came across an illustration somebody had years ago about a person with that kind of internal conflict, that kind of pain from what he went through as a kid is like a person with third-degree burns that are
Mhm.
invisible. And wow, did that enlighten me as an adult to start to understand my father. Um, Third-degree burns, if you're close to someone like that, you can't help but bump into them.
Yeah.
And when you hit one of those spots where there's no skin, it's just things, the overreacting and the emotional stuff from his own background. I began to understand him, and I was able to forgive him finally, and realize that, you know, uh, seeing myself at the foot of Jesus' cross, right beside my dad, the ground's flat.
Mhm.
According to Romans, we both deserve death for our sins.
Right.
So, the phrase, get off your high holy hill,
Mm.
it kind of fits when you're standing before the cross of Christ. You can't claim the blood of Christ for forgiveness for my own sin if I don't apply that to my dad as well. And Matthew's pretty clear about that, where the Lord instructs us, if you don't forgive your brother who you can see, I'm not going to forgive you.
Yeah. I recently interviewed Mike Arnold, who's working in Nigeria. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, we've been crossing paths here with quite a number of interviews. I haven't met him yet, but we're just swapping our books right now.
Interesting. Yeah, the story you talk about as far as your family, the Lord was good to me. The grandfather I knew did not have a temper. That was for whatever reason, that was a thing he was dealing with in his youth. And then as far as my father, he got out of prison. He was on lifetime probation. I don't even want to know what that was for. But he was a different person. He wrote me a letter. He asked for forgiveness. I gave it to him. And for about a year before he died of leukemia, we had an ongoing weekly talk. So, God is good. I had that chance to reconnect with him before he passed away. For you, as far as the process of forgiving your parents, w- was there a process? Was it instant? How did it work exactly?
Well, as you've already indicated, Dad died at 36. I was 11,
Hmm.
and I was a kid, so had a lot of homework to do, just growing up, and sorting through the racket of all those moves, and why are we moving again, and where am I from, and why do these people, have such a different accent than mine, I mean, I was born in Greenville, South Carolina, and then we lived in London for a while, and then we were in Africa. And listening to those old 3-inch tapes, that they used to have back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the family tapes of us kids chattering and carrying on. And I actually had a Southern accent when I was really little. And then I had an English accent when we were living in England. And now we're in New York, and, you know, English has its own brand in New York City too. So just the language and all the constant moves left me with the sense of being lost. And so until you have, when you're taking pictures, they call it camera stabilization. You know, Movies are made and they have a stabilization system so the movie camera doesn't get shake, while they're trying to film. That's what it felt like. It was like trying to get a picture while everything's constantly bouncing around and moving and you don't really have a view. So once things began to settle, after my father died, Mom remarried, and there was more stability in that family with my stepfather. And so I began to, take stock of where I was and what was that all about. Honestly, it took many years for me to discover something that was really counterintuitive, and that was this. And I think this is where we all come to that crossroads of dealing with stuff from the past. And the counterintuitive notion was that I didn't need to control everything. Wow. Um,
Mhm.
y- Control, quote unquote, is often, if not most time, an illusion. You know, How much
Right.
control do we have when I don't control one breath in front of the other one heartbeat after another? They're gifts from God. And so this illusion that we have that we can fix it if we just had control over the situation, not so much. As I began to learn more and more from the word, I needed to surrender to God, who is actually in control. And so, even when it doesn't look like it, which for us human beings, and he's omniscient and we're not, it's most of the time he's in control, and acknowledging and submitting to his power, his strength, and his character. He's love, you know. And how do you snuggle up close to a God like that? Well, through his son, Jesus Christ, and through what the word teaches about him. And
Mhm.
so as I began to grow in my relationship with Christ, it had a direct effect on how I saw those years. And that's how I was able to forgive my father. And that's actually for me where the real story begins. Is one chapter is called Taking Out the Trash. And as I was able to go through this stuff and piece by piece, dig through the garbage pile of hurt feelings, of memories, of some twisted memories. Mom was good at reciting a lot of things that she was hurt by that my father did, right? And as you're
Right.
growing up as a kid, if a parent begins to do this symbiotic thing and you're living vicariously, there's a lot of stuff I thought I remembered, but it was mom's memories that she never stopped talking about. And I had to sort through that pile too. So, once I began to realize that God is who he says he is, he's always good. And it's man that's screwed up,
Mhm.
even with the best of intentions, even Christian missionaries. If that background stuff, if that childhood stuff doesn't get dealt with, it's there. It's buried, but it's there. So when you meet an adult that goes through cycles of maybe unpredictability or starts to show pieces of this chaos, something's under there,
Mhm.
and normally it seems to be it's hurt and it's unfairness. And it's a lot of things that they just haven't been able to surrender to God yet. So it was a long process for me. And here's the irony of it. Uh, I say the story really begins there. I was learning to yield to the God of the Bible and his plan for my life, not me controlling and figuring it all out, right?
Right.
Even if it meant, are you ready? Serving on the foreign mission field, which I swore I'd never do. And so 35 years of this now, that's been the slowly unfolding step by step plan that God had, and that was only revealed as I took those steps one at a time.
Mhm. Again, we're speaking with Bruce Wolff. His website is brigadeair.org, and his book is Finding Hope, Navigating an Obscure Path. And you'll note the wonderful first name that he has. Now, Bruce, talk about becoming a missionary pilot and what's the training like?
Wow. Well, I had sensed, after resolving this stuff from the past, it was like the handcuffs were off. And I began to look again at, like Paul, I suppose, as best I could. Paul on the road to Damascus, he had to get knocked off his horse first. So, here I was climbing back on the horse and saying, all right, well, what do you want me to do? The point of yieldedness. That's again, forgiving the things of the past, taking out the garbage. That's step one. Step two is give God the wide parameter and the bandwidth that he needs and wants from us. Why? Because now I've exchanged my life for the life of Christ and I belong to him. Scripture's clear about that. So if he owns me, if I'm the servant, he's the master, maybe I should ask him what he wants me to do. He has a plan. So there I was seeking, what do you want me to do, Lord? And I realized that my holding out on this thing, I'll do anything but
Hmm.
go into ministry, go to the mission field. I just, stomaching those bad memories and all of that
Right.
from the experience with my dad was also part of that healing process of separating my dad and his mess from the ministry or missions and serving God, right? And it was all one big clump before that. It was all like a ball of yarn. So once I could separate those two things, I realized, wow, what God wants for me is good. He is good, and what he wants for me is to use me in the best way possible. He made me with a purpose and plan, and I need to find out what that is. So I began to look at stuff overseas and what would it be like to serve in this. I realized that I had technical skills. I love to use my hands and my head. And I just sitting in front of a computer in an office cubicle under fluorescent lights, whatever that was not for me. So, I began to look more seriously at these things. And the decision to leave my job and go back to school, flight school, didn't happen until after I was married for 4 years and our second child was on the way. Uh, so, I didn't want to go back to school. As I said, I enjoyed being out working, and I was working in industry. And so the Lord was clearly leading a step at a time, as I said. And, I eventually applied to Moody Aviation in Tennessee. And the school's now in Spokane, Washington, but they were founded in 1946 as the premier flight training school for this missionary aviation enterprise. I was accepted. I quit my job. We moved the family to Tennessee, not knowing how I was going to pay for it. But again, that process of trusting God a step at a time, He provided, and school got paid for, and I served with a group out in Tucson, Arizona, where are, and I flew in and out of Mexico for 7 years. And it was while I was there that I discovered the huge gap in recruitment. Uh, we're so overworked and spread so thin doing this thing, and it's such a critical need. Missions aviation is a thing you use when there is no infrastructure, when there are no roads, when there's no electricity, there's no hospitals, there's no running water. An airplane can still get the job done when the job is Bible translation, when the job is planting churches in third world conditions, frontier missions, when the job is rescuing someone who's been injured in an accident or a snake bite. It's now the ambulance, it's the meat wagon, it's the mail truck. So the
Mm.
airplane is what you use when there is no infrastructure, when there are no roads. So that's where the birthplace of Brigade Air happened, was from those years in the Sierra Madres, just south of where you're sitting right now. And how God put this together a piece at a time still blows my mind.
Yeah. There's a neat story you have in your book, again, Finding Hope, Navigating an Obscure Path, Bruce Wolff. This this story chronicles or talks about a fuel leak, and you have an encounter with the pilot. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. While I was at Moody, I was working in the hangar, minded my own business, and the backstory was that that night before, I was awakened at about 2 a.m. And it was a phone call from a brother of mine who was serving as a missionary in Senegal, West Africa, and there had been a tragedy out there, and this horrible situation. And a guy he died of a heart attack, but then shortly after that, his oldest son, a 12-year-old, was struck by a Senegalese driver and was killed. And mom, with a total of 3 children before the oldest was killed, came back to the States and buried her husband, returned to Senegal only to watch her oldest child killed, came back to the States for another funeral, all back to back. Like, I think it all happened in less than a year. And now she's back serving in Senegal and picking up the pieces. They were with the Dakar Academy, a lot of people have heard of. And so the need of all this expense and travel and funeral costs, it's not things that missionaries typically raise money when they're going to the foreign mission field to say, well, let's have some money for funerals and cross world travel, just in case. So there was a huge financial deficit on the mission, and my brother was working with the gentleman who died of a heart attack to start all this. So he had called to ask for prayer. I hadn't slept hardly, and now I'm in the hangar doing what I'm supposed to be doing the next day, and I'm on a mechanic's creeper. It's a little rolling thing you lay underneath for those of you who do your own oil changes. We use them in an aircraft hangar too to get to the lower parts on the belly of the airplane. So I was working on a project I was assigned to there, and while I was there, the unmistakable growl of a twin-engine Beechcraft Baron. It's a twin-engine airplane. It's a mean airplane. We say mean because it's just got that real throaty sound when it taxis up to the hangar, and very fast airplane. And I've spent some time flying one, not at that point, but many years later. But this Beech Baron is taxiing up, and as it does, it comes up to the hangar door. And from my point of view on this creeper, I look outside and I can see fuel dripping under the left wing of the airplane. For those who don't know, the fuel tanks in most aircraft are inside the wings. So from my vantage point, I'm looking at this fuel leak and plane shut down. I got up off the creeper and walked towards the plane to see what was going on. And it turns out it was Franklin Graham.
Hmm.
And this was his plane used for ministry, and he had done his flight training. In fact, some of his flight training was still ongoing then. This was in the 80s. And while I was a student at Moody, he was getting flight instruction from the same people, but he was not a student officially enrolled in school. He was doing private flight instruction. So he brings his plane there pretty frequently to get worked on or to fuel up. And he comes from Boone, North Carolina, which in that airplane was about an 8-minute flight. And he landed and was taxiing up to do what he came there to do. And I see the fuel leak. He steps down off the wing, and I pointed out to him. Unfortunately for me, the shop supervisor said, "Well, you found it, you fix it."
Hmm.
Well, fixing a fuel leak in an airplane that had just been topped off would normally mean defueling that wing, which has somewhere between 80 and 90 gallons of gas in it, on
Wow.
just the one side. And it would take hours to defuel that wing and get to the root of the problem, which is a very simple fix. It's a very tiny O-ring. It's on a device under the wing that's called a fuel sampler. And there's a valve there, and the valve had this O-ring, and it was stuck with a little piece of sand under it or something like that, and that's what was causing the drip. Well, you got to replace that O-ring and clean it out, but to do it that way could have taken half the morning. And he didn't have time for that. So I went for it, which means you remove the sampler from the wing with 90 gallons of fuel sitting over it, and it starts to gush out. Of course, you're near the hangar floor. The plane's backed outside. It's not in the hangar now because there's a fire hazard. A lot of rags, a lot of things to catch gas, and then quickly change that O-ring, put it back in there, and away we go. Well, uh, I rolled in and out from underneath that plane, I don't know, a dozen times, and he kept feeding me rags to try to help. And when I got up, I'm covered. The fuel was running actually down my shirt with my hands
Hmm.
up over my head and into my armpits, and that stuff stings, man. So he felt bad, and my eyes apparently looked pretty red, and he thought I got gas in my eyes, which I hadn't. I'd just been up all night. And so we started to chat. And that's where I discovered what Franklin Graham does best. And he was running Samaritan's Purse already at that point. And I told him about the story with my brother. He quickly grabbed out a little notepad and took down all the notes. And I didn't know this till about 2 weeks later when I got a letter from him at Moody, and said, "Thanks, good to meet you. Thanks for talking.
Hmm.
The need that you shared, we took care of that." And they wrote a very large check to the mission to zero out all of the expense from this family's tragedy. And that's where I learned firsthand what Samaritan's Purse was all about. And that was the beginning of a relationship that we still have today. He's supported the Ministry of Brigade Air pretty continuously.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was how I met Franklin.
That's excellent. Now, about, I would say 13, 14 years ago, I actually was on AM radio in 3 different markets, and I stopped. My mom got dementia, and I helped take care of her, and I worked remotely. Fortunately, you know, in a way, COVID was a blessing for me. I know it affected a lot of people negatively, but I was able to stay home and take care of my mother. But about 13 years ago, I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Sam Childers, who had a very unorthodox missionary situation. Have you ever met him, and what was your opinion of him if you did?
Sam Childers does not ring a bell.
Okay.
I had a neighbor in Elizabethton, Tennessee, last name Chambers, but I don't think that's where you're talking about.
Okay, no, this was a gentleman, and I forget which country in Africa, but he was known as the machine gun preacher.
Not ringing a
Yeah.
bell for me.
Okay, we'll move on. So, uh, talk about Brigade Air again as far as how many youth do you work with yearly and what do they learn there?
Okay. Uh, well, the kids fly every day. Um, they the number of kids each summer varies. We've had just over 4,000 young people at nearly 200 week-long aviation camps in 21 states and 5 foreign countries over the past 25 years. So, small amount of campers to 2 to 3 pilots and 2 aircraft. That's intentional for safety. You don't want a mob of kids running around the ramp with propellers moving. So 4,000 of, but here's the great part is we've done that uh, in almost half the U.S. Um, and in 5 foreign countries, completely accident and injury free. And that's with loaned aircraft and volunteer pilots. It's the way we keep the cost of the camp down low. You can pay $3,000-4,000 for a week of aviation camp if you go to Embry-Riddle. They have a youth program. The EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association, has a program called Young Eagles, also very expensive. Beautiful facilities up there in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. But again, you're not going to attract the typical Christian homeschool family that usually has too much month left at the end of the money. And, a lot of kids, and those are that's been our best target audience for recruiting future missionary pilots is kids who have been nurtured in the word since they were babies, with parents that understand what Deuteronomy 6 is all about, the nurture and admonition of the Lord when you rise up, when you lie down. It's just the constant soak time for those kids. And so there's a lot of groundwork already in place before they come to our camp. So they get hands-on familiarization flights, aircraft repair and maintenance exposure, classroom learning. They tour air traffic control facilities and museums. Those with a high aptitude, high interest are guided towards mission-sending agencies and flight schools to continue on the recruitment path. So we are the first exposure. We are the challenge to these young people, and then we hand them off because I'm pretty much a one-man band with a lot of volunteers, and so let these recruitment departments for organizations like JARS, Jungle Aviation and Radio Service is what an acronym stands for. They are the IT, Transportation, and Communications Department of Wycliffe Bible Translators, based here in North Carolina. MAF is another one, Mission Aviation Fellowship. They've been on the West Coast for over 50 years. So they participate in our program. They each have rebranded their own Brigade Air Camp, which has been going in each of their places 15 or 20 years now, and it works. So the idea here was not for me to run around like a one-armed paper hanger till I drop dead. It was,
Mhm.
let's try to change the recruitment habits of these larger organizations, because ultimately they're the ones who benefit from it, and thereby the kingdom of God, the church, is benefited from every tribe, tongue, and nation benefiting from church planting, not just American churches.
Mhm. Do you have any stories about you being a missionary pilot that would be considered the scariest or the most maybe unusual situation you've been in?
Well, I walk a fine line with this because, you know, sensationalism is what sells newspapers, right?
Yeah.
And I've been a flight instructor for 35 years. So, uh, you know, the stories that you get to tell, some guys put that into juicy books and,
I see.
and yellow press and all that. That doesn't mean I can't tactfully tell a couple of them, but uh, it's also something that for Brigade Air, trying to be the introductory and the most disciplined and safest picture of what aviation is, we don't focus a lot on that stuff, but we do tell the stories of guys like Paul Dye or those 5 mission. Paul Dye was a pilot with New Tribes Mission down in Sanford, not too far from you down there south of Sierra Vista. They're close to the Mexican border. There's a harrowing tale of what he went through escaping Colombia after rebels had absconded and taken him and the other missionaries hostage for ransom money, and how he escaped from that. They've got a movie they made out of that. We use that movie with the kids to show, yeah, just like in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, the places you'll find yourself in serving the Lord, and we have his promises too, right? You can
Mhm.
never be in a better spot than obeying and being where he wants you, and you'll serve the greatest purpose. But those stories are there. But for me, honestly, the most harrowing thing that ever happened wasn't serving in missions. It was in training. Just
Mm.
before I was done at Moody Aviation, it was in 1990. I graduated from college up in New York in 81, then started a family, was working in industry, and had 1.5 children before I went to Moody Aviation. So it was, for me, kicking and screaming, really. Going back
Hmm.
to school, I just didn't want to do it. So I was 30 when I graduated from Moody. And so in 1990, it was on one of the last flight training flights. And at that point, you're building time as a pilot in command. And so they'd send us out in teams of 2. And myself and another classmate took a flight in one of Moody's Cessna 210s, nice airplane. And we flew from Elizabethton, Tennessee, Upper East Tennessee, in the Blue Ridge Mountains down to Orlando Executive Airport, pretty close to where Disney is in Florida. And we logged the time, had a safe flight. We flew IFR, instrument flight rules, on the way down and on the way back. Well, on our way back, we were over the top of Jacksonville Naval Air Station. So we're on the Atlantic coast, obviously. Um, we're flying IFR heading north at about 180 miles an hour. So we're popping in and out of the clouds at this level on this instrument flight when suddenly something big, ominous, and gray popped out of the clouds right in front of us, cruising in the opposite direction, and it was only about 50 feet lower than our altitude.
Hmm.
It was a Sikorsky Seahawk, a Navy helicopter, flying in the opposite direction, and it has a 54-foot diameter rotor, the chopper blades on top of it, right? And it just whisked by silently underneath us, and we both saw it. I mean, you can't miss it, but we're talking about maybe 2 seconds from the time it popped out of the clouds to the time it just whisked underneath us. And my experience with helicopters is a lot of noise and vibration and bluster, and this thing went, of course, we were above the rotors and we were flying in the opposite direction equally fast. So, it was so creepy because it was quiet and it was there. It was a flash, but it was so close we could actually see that the pilot and the co-pilot in their Nomex flight suits, one of them had Ray-Ban aviator sunglasses with the gold rims on it.
Hmm.
That's what we saw from our plane as it whooshed underneath us. So, that part in the book is called Ray-Bans Closing Fast. And I've never had a near miss like that again in 36 years of flying. So for perspective, this is why I said what I said when I preempted about safety issues.
Yeah.
According to a 2017 Harvard study published in the New York Times, a person's odds of dying in a plane crash are 1 in 11 million. You know what it is for traveling in an automobile? 1
No.
in 5,000.
Hmm.
Your odds are 1 in 5,000 for dying in a car wreck and 1 in 11 million for traveling in an aircraft. You're more likely, the same study says, to die from a shark bite or being struck by lightning than you are to die in an airplane. But the media never misses a sensational airplane mishap. It sells headlines. So
Mhm.
that's why I'm kind of careful about telling
Yeah.
too many stories, because I don't want to just continue the misperception that somehow aviation is dangerous. It's actually the safest form of transportation we have.
Yeah. That's an important point. And again, we're speaking today with Bruce Wolff, and you can find out more information about Brigade Air at brigadeair.org. And again, let me show you a copy of the book, Finding Hope, Navigating an Obscure Path. Great book, Bruce Wolff. Before we go, what do you hope people will take away from your book? What are the most important thoughts that you think people should take away from this book?
Well, amid the, excuse me, there's an ocean, a sea of fear, anxiety, and hopelessness out there today. Uh,
Mhm.
we could talk all morning about politics, which I don't want to waste my time on. God's in control. Throughout history, we see these cycles coming and going pretty continuously. Um, and so we're at a point where um, my personal belief is that we are seriously gearing up for the return of Jesus Christ. And, there's two sides to that. Jesus warned us. We see it in the book of Matthew, we see it in the book of Revelation, that we have broad strokes. Some of it's very specific, but broad strokes about keep your eyes open, be circumspect. The old King James word of circumspect. What does that mean? It means looking around. You don't get hyper focused on what's going on, but know where you are and know what's happening, right?
Mhm.
Without Christ, all there is fear, anxiety, and hopelessness. And the same things we're seeing as believers, everybody's seeing if their eyes are open. And
Yeah.
it's not looking good, right?
Right.
Um, so with that backdrop, I want my book, Finding Hope, Navigating an Obscure Path, to be a breath of fresh air, a source of encouragement. I'm no Rhodes Scholar. I'm no Bible answer man. But this is my story of navigating life one step at a time with the Bible as my guide and watching what God did, put simply. Hopefully, it can be a parable that he can use to shine a light on where you are and where he wants you to be. If a broken and confused kid like me could overcome a deep sense of it was really purposelessness and discover God's purpose for my life, so can anyone else. It's there. It's just a question of will we trust that this is God's word? Will we trust that God, the Creator, has done this special thing and given us this book? There's a chapter in my book about that too. How many have tried to destroy the Bible over time, and yet here it is, still the best-selling book of all time, right? Somewhere
Right.
between 5 and 7 billion copies. It's the first thing that ever was printed when a printing press was first invented by Guggenheim back in the 1400s. And God's given us this thing, and it's our choice whether we're going to believe it or not. And so I want my story to point people towards what it is that takes away that sense of pointlessness, meaninglessness, fear, anxiety, because people are stressed out and they need something to encourage them.
Mhm. He's the man with the wonderful first name. His book is Finding Hope, Navigating an Obscure Path, Bruce Wolff, and his website is brigadeair.org. Bruce, this has been great. I hope I can have you back someday. And in the meantime, take care and God bless you.
Thank you, Bruce. Great to be with you.